I still remember the way the coffee shop smelled that day, burnt espresso beans and sugary pastries, the kind of scent that clings to your clothes. It was a Tuesday afternoon in Portland, the sky outside a dull gray, spitting rain against the windows. I sat across from Eddie, my hands wrapped around a chipped mug, trying to ignore the way my stomach twisted. He was late, as usual, his dark hair damp from the drizzle when he finally slid into the booth. He didn't smile. That should have been my first clue. "You look nice," I said, because I didn't know what else to say. My voice sounded too eager, like I was trying to convince myself it was true. I'd spent an hour picking out my outfit, a thrifted sweater, jeans that actually fit, boots I'd polished the night before. It wasn't much, but it was the best I could do. "Thanks," Eddie muttered, barely looking at me. He was scrolling through his phone, his thumb flicking across the screen like I wasn't even there. I waited for him to ask how I was, to notice the way I'd braided my hair the way he once said he liked. He didn't. "So," I tried again, leaning forward, "how's work? You said you were up for that promotion, right?" He sighed, setting his phone down with a little too much force. The table wobbled. "Yeah, it's fine. Look, Mia, I gotta be honest." His eyes finally met mine, and they were cold, like the rain outside had seeped into them. Us. It's not working." The words hit like a punch I didn't see coming. My mouth went dry, but I forced a laugh, thinking maybe I'd misheard. "What do you mean? We were fine last week. We watched that dumb zombie movie at your place, and you—" "I know," he cut me off, his voice sharp. "But things change. I've been thinking, and I need someone who's got their life together. You know? Someone stable. The word landed heavy, like a stone in my chest. I knew what he meant, but I asked anyway because I needed to hear it. "Stable how?" He leaned back, crossing his arms. "Come on, Mia, you don't have a job. You're crashing on your friend's couch. I'm busting my ass at the firm, and I can't carry both of us." I stared at him, my fingers tightening around the mug until my knuckles ached. The coffee was cold now, bitter when I took a sip to buy time. I wanted to tell him I was trying, that I'd sent out 50 resumes that month alone, that I'd spent nights refreshing job boards until my eyes burned, that losing my gig at the bookstore when it closed wasn't my fault. But all I could manage was, "I'm working on it, Eddie. You know that." "Yeah, well, working on it isn't enough." He stood, pulling his jacket on. "I'm sorry, okay? I need more." And that was it. He left a crumpled 10 on the table for his untouched latte and walked out, the bell above the door jingling like it was mocking me. I sat there for a long time, watching the rain streak down the glass, feeling like the world had tilted sideways. The barista gave me a pitying look when she cleared the table, and I mumbled something about leaving soon, even though I had nowhere to go. That night, I curled up on Jess's couch, my best friend since high school, who'd been letting me crash in her tiny apartment for 3 months. The couch smelled faintly of cat litter and spilled wine, but it was home, at least for now. Jess was sprawled on the floor, eating leftover Thai food straight from the carton. When I told her what happened, he said, "What?" Her fork froze halfway to her mouth, her eyes wide. "Mia, he's a jerk. You're better off." "I don't feel better off," I said, pulling the blanket tighter around me. My voice cracked and I hated it. I thought he got me, you know? Like, he saw past the mess." Jess scooted closer, resting her chin on her knees. "He didn't deserve you, and honestly, he's gonna regret this when you're killing it someday." I snorted, wiping my eyes with the sleeve of my hoodie. "Killing it? Jess, I can't even get a call back from a gas station. You will," she said, so certain it almost made me believe her. "You're smart, Mia. You're scrappy. Something's gonna click." But nothing clicked. Not that week, or the next, or the month after that. I kept applying, retail, waitressing, data entry, anything, but the rejections piled up like junk mail. My savings were gone, my credit card maxed out. Jess never complained, but I saw the way her fridge got emptier, the way she stopped buying her fancy oat milk lattes. I started skipping meals to stretch what little I had, telling her I wasn't hungry when my stomach growled loud enough to give me away. One night, I was scrolling through my phone, avoiding another job board, when I stumbled across a post on some random forum. It was about side hustles, people sharing how they'd turned weird hobbies into cash. One guy was making bank selling custom dog collars on Etsy. Another was flipping thrift store furniture for triple the price. I kept reading, my thumb hovering over the screen, something sparking in my chest. I didn't have a hobby, not really, but I'd always been good at finding deals. Growing up, my mom and I would hit yard sales every weekend, haggling over chipped teacups and vintage records. I could spot a steal from a mile away. What if I tried that? I said out loud, startling Jess's cat, who hissed and bolted off the couch. Tried what? Jess called from the kitchen where she was burning popcorn again. Flipping stuff, like buying cheap and selling high. I used to do it with my mom. She poked her head out, her ponytail lopsided. You mean like those people on eBay who sell old Nikes for $1,000? Kind of, I said, sitting up. But smaller, thrift stores, garage sales, whatever. I could start with what I've got. Which wasn't much. Maybe $20 after scraping together change from my bag. But it was something. The next morning I hit the local Goodwill, my heart pounding like I was on some secret mission. The place smelled like mothballs and laundry detergent. The fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. I combed through racks of clothes, bins of knickknacks, my fingers brushing over faded denim and chipped ceramics. I ended up with a vintage leather jacket for $8 and a pair of retro sunglasses for $2. They weren't much, but they felt like treasure. I spent that night researching how to list on eBay, what made items sell, how to take photos that didn't suck. My phone's camera was garbage, so I borrowed Jess's and staged the jacket on her balcony, the sunset making it look way cooler than it was. I listed it for $40, the sunglasses for $15, and went to bed thinking I'd be lucky to break even. By morning, both had sold. I stared at my phone, my hands shaking as I refreshed the app. $55 minus fees. It wasn't a fortune, but it was mine, earned in a day. I felt like I'd cracked some code. That was the start. I got obsessed, spending every spare hour hunting for deals, flea markets, estate sales, even dumpster diving behind a vintage shop once. Don't judge, I found a mint-condition typewriter. I learned what sold, mid-century lamps, old band tees, quirky ceramics, and what didn't. Nobody wants your Aunt's doilies, trust me. Jess helped when she could, driving me to sales in her beat-up Honda, laughing when I'd haggle like my life depended on it. I reinvested every penny, buying better stock, learning to spot designer labels hidden in thrift store chaos. 6 months in, I was clearing $1,000 a month. Not enough to move out, but enough to pay Jess rent, to buy groceries without wincing. I got a cheap laptop and started a spreadsheet, tracking every sale, every expense. It felt good, like I was building something real. But I still thought about Eddie sometimes, his words echoing when I was alone. I need someone stable. I'd picture his face, smug and certain, and it'd push me to keep going, to prove him wrong. Then came the estate sale that changed everything. It was in a fancy neighborhood, one of those sprawling houses with a lawn that looked fake. The ad said vintage collectibles, so I showed up at dawn, first in line. The place was a gold mine, Art Deco lamps, old vinyl, a whole room of mid-century furniture, but what caught my eye was a box of jewelry in the corner, half buried under moth-eaten scarves. It looked like junk, tangled chains, cloudy stones, but something told me to dig deeper. I bought the lot for $50, my hands sweaty as I handed over the cash. Back at Jess's, I spread it out on her coffee table, picking through it with a magnifying glass I'd snagged from a pawn shop. Most of it was costume stuff, but one piece stood out, a gold necklace with a small, cloudy opal pendant. It was heavy, the clasp engraved with tiny initials. I spent hours researching, cross-referencing marks online, my heart racing as I realized it might be real. I took it to a jeweler the next day, a gruff old guy who squinted at it under a loupe for what felt like forever. "Where'd you get this?" he asked, his voice suspicious. "Estate sale," I said, trying to sound casual. "Is it worth anything?" He set it down, looking at me like I'd just handed him a bomb. "It's Victorian solid gold. The opal's high quality despite the wear. I'd say $15,000 easy. More at auction." I almost laughed, thinking he was messing with me, but he wasn't. I left the shop in a daze, the necklace tucked in my pocket, my mind spinning. $15,000, more money than I'd ever seen, but I didn't sell it, not right away. Instead, I used it as collateral for a small loan, enough to rent a storage unit and buy better inventory. I started hitting bigger sales, traveling to Seattle, San Francisco, anywhere I could find a deal. I built a website, hired a kid to help with shipping, and watched my sales climb. $5,000 a month, then 10, then 20. By the end of that year, I had my own place, a small loft with creaky floors and a view of the river. I paid off the loan, sold the necklace at auction for $18,000, and kept going. I wasn't just flipping thrift store finds anymore. I was sourcing rare antiques, collaborating with collectors, even getting featured in a local blog about up-and-coming entrepreneurs. The money started piling up, more than I'd ever imagined. I opened a savings account, then an investment portfolio, watching the numbers grow until I hit 7 figures. A millionaire, technically, though it didn't feel real. Jess threw a party when I told her, dragging me to a rooftop bar with fairy lights and overpriced cocktails. "To Mia," she said, raising her glass, her eyes shiny. "The queen of comebacks." I laughed, but part of me was still back in that coffee shop, hearing Eddie's voice. I hadn't seen him since that day, hadn't wanted to. But life's funny like that, because a week later, I ran into him at a networking event downtown. I was there to meet a client, dressed in a blazer I'd actually bought new, my hair pulled back in a way that felt polished. He was at the bar, sipping a beer, looking smaller somehow. His suit was wrinkled, his smile forced when he spotted me. "Mia?" He set his drink down, his eyes wide. "Wow, you look different." "Yeah," I said, keeping my voice light. "Things change. We talked for a minute, the kind of awkward small talk you do with someone you used to know. He was still at the firm, still chasing that promotion. I didn't tell him much, just that I was doing okay. But then he leaned closer, his voice dropping. "I heard about your business," he said, like it was a secret. "Antiques, right? That's impressive. I always knew you had potential." I almost choked on my wine. Potential. The word burned, but I smiled, tight and polite. "Thanks. Look, Mia," he said, rubbing the back of his neck. "I messed up, okay? I was in a bad place back then. Stressed out. Maybe we could, grab coffee sometime? Catch up?" I looked at him, really looked, and saw everything, the way he'd dismissed me, the way he'd made me feel like I was nothing, and I realized I didn't need his validation anymore. I didn't need him to see me. "I'm good," I said, stepping back. "Take care, Eddie." I walked away, my heels clicking on the hardwood floor, the city lights sparkling through the windows. Outside, the air was crisp, smelling like rain and possibility. I pulled my coat tighter and smiled, not for him, but for me, for the girl who'd kept going, who'd turned rejection into rocket fuel. And as I headed home, my phone buzzing with new orders, I knew I was just getting started.